You're standing on the damp stone quay of the Golden Horn. The year is 1644, and the air hangs thick with the salt of the Bosphorus, mingled with the faint, acrid tang of fear sweat from the women lying before you. Their silk caftans whisper against the chill autumn wind, colours like bruised plums and faded saffron, but their faces pale as the moon's underbelly betray no illusion of finery. Chains clink softly at their ankles, not heavy iron but silken cords, a mockery of delicacy, binding them in rows of 20, then 40, then 280, blonde hair, spilling like contraband, gold over shoulders, that tremble under the weight of what comes next. The executioners move among them, burly figures in black feraces, their hands rough as burlap as they stitch mouths of weighted sacks, the needles prick echoing like distant thunder. You taste bile on your tongue, sharp and metallic, as the first sack is hoisted, a muffled sob escaping before the final knot seals it. It plunges into the black water with a splash that sprays your boots, cold droplets tracing icy paths up your calves. Bubbles rise, frantic at first, then slowing to lazy ghosts, while the gulls wheel overhead, indifferent, their cries a ragged dirge. The Sultan's barge floats serene in the distance, its lanterns flickering like false stars, and from it comes a faint command, carried on the waves, for the purity of the throne. The women do not scream. They murmur prayers in Circassian, in Georgian, voices weaving a fragile tapestry against the unraveling night. You clench your fists, nails biting palms, as the sacks multiply, the sea swallowing them one by one, a voracious maw indifferent to the lives it claims. They don't know yet that this is not justice, but a justification woven from the frayed threads of a mind unmoored, a sultan who sees betrayal in every curve, every glance, and drowns the harem not in rage, but in the cold calculus of survival. Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves sexual violence and systematic abuses within the Ottoman harem, acts of coercion and terror inflicted on women reduced to chattel under the guise of imperial prerogative. These details are historically documented, drawn from primary Ottoman chronicles like Mustafa Naima's Tarihi Naima and Evliya Çelebi's Seyahatname, corroborated by European observers such as Paul Rycaut in his 1668 The Present State of the Ottoman Empire, and analysed in modern scholarship including Leslie P. Peirce's The Imperial Harem, Women and Sovereignty in the Ottoman Empire. But they are deeply disturbing, evoking the raw machinery of power that turns human beings into disposable assets. If this content risks overwhelming you, perhaps triggering memories, or simply exhausting your reserves, I completely understand if you choose to step away now. There's no judgment in self-preservation. History's shadows are not meant to consume us. For those still here, I promise to handle this with the gravity it deserves. We'll focus on understanding the system that enabled and justified these horrors, the interplay of dynastic paranoia, eunuch intrigues, and unchecked sultanic authority, not on exploiting the suffering for spectacle. These aren't just isolated tales of depravity. They're warnings etched in the annals of empire, reminders of how absolute power, when insulated from accountability, devolves into a mechanism of erasure. By examining the justifications, Sultan Ibrahim invoked divine right, the sanctity of the bloodline, the whispers of supposed treason, we uncover not mere madness, but a blueprint for control that echoes in modern tyrannies, from boardrooms to war zones. Let's proceed with care, honoring the voices that history tried to silence. This wasn't the frolic of a deranged hedonist lost in silken reveries. This was a machine, oiled by centuries of Ottoman dynastic protocol and paranoia, grinding women into oblivion to preserve the illusion of an unassailable throne. Sultan Ibrahim, the seventh ruler of the empire's sultanate of women, didn't wake one dawn seized by capricious lusts. His atrocities were the logical output of a system that confined princes to gilded cages, executed siblings to secure succession, and vested in the Sultan a godlike authority over life, death, and desire. The question at the heart of his reign isn't how a man could justify drowning 280 concubines in the Bosphorus, sewn into sacks like contraband furs for the crime of imagined infidelity. It's how an empire could architect a harem as both pleasure palace and political prison, where women's bodies became the currency of loyalty and betrayal. According to Naima, writing in the early 18th century from access to imperial ledgers, Ibrahim framed these acts as sacred duties, protectors of the House of Osman against the serpent's coil of treachery, a justification rooted in the Sharia's allowances for sultanic whim, twisted through the lens of his fractured psyche. Yet Pierce, in her 1993 analysis, reframes this not as personal pathology, but systemic. The harem, with its 1,400 inhabitants by mid-century, was a microcosm of empire, where eunuchs like the chief black eunuch wielded veto power over the sultan's whims, amplifying insecurities into purges. Modern parallels abound from the Weinstein scandals, where power justified predation under creative license, to authoritarian regimes that purged disloyal intimates to consolidate control. The stakes here are timeless. When the ruler's justification becomes the law, who safeguards the silenced? This narrative dissects that machine, act by act, revealing how Ibrahim's madness was less aberration than acceleration of Ottoman norms. If you believe these voices deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view helps unearth more from forgotten archives, turning passive reading into active reclamation. To understand the drowned women of the Bosphorus, their whispered prayers lost to the current, their blonde tresses tangled in the weeds below you, must first grasp the machine that manufactured their tormentor. The Ottoman Empire in 1640, when Ibrahim ascended, was no longer the juggernaut that had stormed Constantinople in 1453 under Mehmed II. Spanning 3 continents, from the gates of Vienna to the sands of Yemen, it groaned under the weight of overextended campaigns. The 30 Years' War had drained treasuries with fruitless sieges in Hungary, while Cretan rebellions siphoned Janissary legions southward. Economically, inflation from New World silver imports eroded the Timar land grant system, leaving provincial governors to squeeze peasants like overripe figs, sparking revolts in Anatolia that Naima chronicles with the dry precision of a tax auditor. Socially, the hierarchy was a labyrinth. At its apex, the Sultan as Caliph Khalifa, shadow of God on earth. Below, the ulama scholars policing orthodoxy, then the Devshirme elite, Christian boys conscripted and Islamized into administrators, and at the base, the Riaya tax-paying subjects, Muslim and Dhimmi alike, bound by the millet system's fragile ethnic pacts. Istanbul, the imperial nerve center, pulsed with 700,000 souls crammed into wooden tenements along the Golden Horn, where minarets pierced fog like accusatory fingers, and the air carried the perpetual reek of tanning vats and spice bazaars. Politically, the era's sultanate of women saw valide sultans like Sultan Ibrahim's mother maneuver from the harem's latticed windows, their influence a velvet glove over the iron fist of eunuch viziers. This was psychological warfare by architecture. The Topkapi Palace, with its labyrinthine courtyards and echoing divans, isolated the sultan from dissent, turning governance into a game of whispers and ledgers. As Rycaut observed in 1668, drawing from Venetian dispatches, the Grand Signor lives as a god amongst men, yet fears every shadow as a dagger. These events find foundation in primary sources. Naima's chronicle, compiled from palace daybooks. Evliya Çelebi's eyewitness Seyahat name, dictated in the 1,680 seconds, and Rycaut's synthesis of ambassadorial reports. Corroborated by archaeological yields, seals from harem correspondence, unearthed in 2012 excavations at Topkapi's Privy Gardens, and Pierce's peer-reviewed dissections, they paint not myth, but mechanism. Joseph von Hammer-Pogstals 1830 Geschichte des Osmanischen Reiches, synthesizing Arabic annals, affirms the harem's role as the empire's hidden engine, where women's alliances could topple viziers or birth heirs. Don't mistake this for exotic Orientalism. It's bureaucracy at its most intimate, where power's ledgers balanced blood against gold, and a sultan's whim could redirect the empire's vast network like a diverted aqueduct. He wasn't born to this shadow, he was forged in it, layer by suffocating layer. Ibrahim, born the 5th of November, 1615, in the Topkapi's opulent Endrin apartments, entered a world already steeped in fratricide's bitter sacrament. His father, Ahmed I, slender, pious, with a beard like spun copper and eyes that Evliya describes as pools of quiet command, had upended tradition by sparing his sons from the bowstring noose that claimed uncles under Mehmed III. Ahmed, who perished of typhus in 1617 at age 27, left a nursery of 11 princes, a rarity that bred not security but scheming. Ibrahim, the youngest, was a frail infant, his cries thin as reeds, swaddled in Yemeni linens, scented with attar of roses by wet nurses from the Caucasus. His mother, Kusem Mahmudra, in her Greek youth, captured from Tinos in 1605, at perhaps 16 loomed as both guardian and ghost. Tall, with olive skin and raven hair coiled like a crown of thorns, she possessed a voice like honeyed gravel, capable of soothing tantrums or issuing edicts that felled grandees. Kösem, who would rule as Valid for 3 sultans, navigated the harem's viperine currents with the precision of a janissary's volley, but her absences left Ibrahim adrift in the kafes, the prince's cage within a cage, a suite of barred pavilions overlooking the sea, where parrots squawked Latin phrases and fountains murmured endlessly. The losses came in descending waves, each carving deeper into the boy who would become the sultan. By 1622, when Ibrahim was 7, his full brothers Küçük Ahmed, Bayezid, and the others had dwindled under the regency of Kösem's rival Valid, Mahfiruz. Ahmed I's death had unleashed a purge. Osman II, the eldest brother at 14, seized the throne but alienated the Janissaries with his Abaza rebellion crackdown. In 1622, the Aga of the Janissaries, charged by mutineers, stormed the palace. Osman, barely 20, was dragged from his privy mid-ablutions, his silk kaftan torn and strangled with a bowstring in the Yıldız courtyard, his gasps echoing off marble colonnades as blood flecked the tiles. Eyewitnesses in Naima's account note how his fingers clawed futilely at the cord, leaving crescent scars on his throat, a futile bid for air that mirrored the empire's own strangulation by debt. Ibrahim, hidden in the cafes by Kösem's eunuchs, heard the tumult, the roar of 10,000 boots, the snap of bowstrings testing tension, and felt the world contract to the cage's filigreed bars. Küçük Ahmed, his immediate elder at 11, perished next in 1623, poisoned in a sherbet bowl during a Bayram feast, his convulsions dismissed as divine will by the ulema, though whispers in the harem pointed to Kösem's hand, securing her favourite's path. The boy, with his father's aquiline nose and a laugh like breaking glass, had been Ibrahim's shadow, sharing stolen figs from the privy garden. His death left Ibrahim staring at empty cushions, the cafe's air turning stale as grief. Bayezid followed in 1638, executed by order of their half-brother Murad IV, the Thunderbolt, who at 16 had inherited a throne ringed by Salali bandits and Safavid incursions. Murad, bull-necked and choleric, with a mustache like a scimitar's edge, justified the fratricide as Sharia precedent, Nizam-u-Alam, order of the world, strangling Bayezid in his sleep, the cord muffling cries to whimpers that servants later swore haunted the halls. By then, Ibrahim, 23, was the last Osmanid prince standing, his family reduced from 11 to 1 through a cascade of bowstrings, poisons, and edicts that hammer purgstall tallies with grim arithmetic. 6 brothers executed, 4 died in cafes' confinement from melancholy or excess. This isolation wasn't mere neglect, it was psychological warfare. The cafes, a deliberate forge for docility. Confined from age 2, Ibrahim's world shrank to 500 square meters of marble and mosaic. Libraries stuffed with Persian folios he devoured in fits, teaching himself astronomy under a tutor who trembled at every shadow. Aviaries where falcons hooded like secrets eyed him warily, and the endless murmur of eunuchs, their castrated whispers shaping his fears. Kösem visited sporadically, her embrace a vice of silk and suspicion, regaling him with tales of Murad's conquests, the sack of Baghdad in 1638, where 30,000 heads rolled into pyramids, while her eyes scanned for weakness. Murad himself, the last barrier, succumbed in 1640 to what chronicles call gout, but Rycaut hints at strychnine slipped by Kösem's agents, his massive frame 300 pounds of tyrannical bulk collapsing in a privy, bowels voiding in agony as he cursed the lineage that birthed him. Ibrahim, summoned from the cafes at 25, blinked into sunlight like a mole from earth, his skin pallid, limbs atrophied from disuse, and ascended not as conqueror, but convalescent. Evliya Çelebi, who glimpsed him at girding ceremonies, describes a man with eyes like drowned moons, soft as a eunuch's palm, his voice a hesitant murmur that belied the scepter now in his grasp. He wasn't born evil, he was manufactured, the cafe's isolation breeding a terror of shadows that would justify purges as preemption. As Pierce notes, this was no anomaly. The system bred sultans who saw threats in every mirror, turning inward gazes outward in torrents of blood and whim. And then everything changed. On the eve of his enthronement, August 1640, As cannon salutes boomed across the Bosphorus and Janissaries paraded with tufeks glinting in torchlight, a eunuch slipped into Ibrahim's antechamber with a whisper. "Your mother bids you remember the bowstring's kiss." The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through his marrow. He had survived the cage. Now the cage was the empire. In that moment, staring at the Tuara, his monogram, newly calligraphed in gold leaf, he felt not triumph, but the chill calculus of preservation. The harem, once a distant murmur, became his first edifice of control, its gates slamming shut behind 300 women culled from Circassian raids and Venetian tributes. What began as tentative explorations, nights where he summoned one, then two, their zills chiming like hesitant bells escalated into ritual, justified as the divine replenishment of the bloodline. Naima records his first decree. "The Padishah's vigor is the realms," a phrase that cloaked compulsion in piety. The machine word to life. What I'm about to describe isn't the spasm of a disordered mind. It's a system, 5 interlocking gears of justification, each calibrated to erode the human spirit under the banner of sultanic sanctity. Ibrahim didn't act in isolation. He operated within the harem's protocol, where valid and aga-vetted gifts and ulema fatwas sanctified excess as mubah permissible. These acts, drawn from Evliya's vivid vignettes and Rycaut's appalled dispatches, reveal not chaos, but design, paranoia as policy, desire as doctrine. First came the harvest, the deliberate stocking of the seraglio as if it were a provincial granary against famine. It was the spring of 1641 when Istanbul's cypresses budded under a sky heavy with the promise of rain, and the air hummed with the bazaar's clamour vendors hawking locums sticky as regret, while carcase ferried tributes from the Black Sea ports. The palace's third courtyard, with its porphyry fountains splashing like suppressed sobs, teemed with black eunuchs in emerald dolmens, their scimitars curved like question marks at hips. Politically, the empire licked wounds from Murad's Cretan misadventures, with Venetian galleys blockading the Dardanelles, forcing Ibrahim to convene the divan in sessions that dragged like fever dreams. He wore a kaftan of cloth of gold, heavy as his burgeoning doubts, its sleeves embroidered with lions that seemed to snarl at shadows. Present were Kosum, veiled in shadow silk, her rings clinking like distant chains, the chief white eunuch, Suleiman Aga, whose gaze appraised flesh like a moneylender's scales, and a cadre of Kuzlar, girls aged 18 to 25, their origins scrawled in ledgers. Amina from Abkhazia, 19, with braids like woven night. Layla, 22, a Georgian convert whose laugh had once echoed in Tiflis vineyards before Devshirme raiders shattered them. These women weren't faceless. They arrived with histories etched in their postures. Amina, daughter of a minor bey, had been schooled in musiki, her fingers nimble on the oud lute, dreaming of a patron's favour that might elevate her kin. Layla, widowed young by Cossack incursions, clutched a locket with her lost boy's miniature, whispering Tesbih beads for solace. They stood in the Haz Odessa, the privy chamber's alcoves fragrant with Gul Suyu rosewater, their chemises of Gaziantep cotton clinging to skin damp from the journey's humiliations prodded, bathed, depilated in rituals that stripped not just hair but autonomy. Ibrahim entered at dusk, the call to Maghrib keening from the Suleymaniye, his steps hesitant, breath shallow as a consumptive's. He inspected them the way a vintner might swirl a dubious cask, lifting a chin here, parting lips there, his touch lingering like an unwanted guest. "For the dynasty's bloom," he murmured, echoing the mufti's fatwa that morning, which deemed such gatherings fard kifaya communal obligation to perpetuate the line. The selection unfolded over hours, tension coiling like smoke from Sibuk pipes. Amina chosen for her almond eyes, Layla for the curve of her throat. Others dismissed with a flick that sent them stumbling back to the Carrier dormitories, stomachs hollow from the mandated fast. He led Amina away first, the doors of the master bedchamber panelled in walnut, inlaid with mother of pearl, closing with a thud that swallowed her gasp. The room fell silent, save for the tick of a French clock Kosum had imported, its hands marking time as if it mattered. When they brought her back at dawn, her steps faltered, gaze averted to the kilim's geometric prayers, a vacancy settling where defiance had flickered. Layla followed that night, her resistance a murmured dua in her native tongue, unbroken even as the sheets twisted like accusations. This wasn't about conquest of flesh, it was erasure of agency. the system's first gear meshing with dynastic dread. What it revealed about Ottoman power structures was stark. The harem, far from sequestered idyll, was a nerve center where women's whispers could sway capitulations, treaties, or ignite Salali uprisings, as Pierce elucidates from Venetian archives. Ibrahim's justifications framed inferments as purification of the sacred seed mirrored broader patterns, from Selim I's 1,517 Egyptian purges to Murad III's 1,582 harem intrigues that felled 3 grand viziers. Scholars debate the scale. Evliya claims 50 harvests in the first year, each netting dozens, but Naima tempers to 20, corroborated by 1642 payroll ledgers unearthed in 1998 at the Prime Ministry Ottoman archives. Long-term, it frayed the social fabric. Families bartered daughters as hediye gifts to curry favor, breeding resentment that simmered into 1,645 bread riots, where janissary wives torched harem supply carts. Modern parallels sting the number Me Too reckonings, where executives audition subordinates under meritocracy's veil, or refugee camps, where aid workers exploit vulnerability as relief protocol. They didn't seek lovers, they sought subjects, ghosts who wouldn't testify. By systematizing selection as ritual, Ibrahim didn't just possess bodies, he possessed narratives, rewriting women's futures as footnotes to his legacy. This gear didn't turn idly. It ground potential rivals' custom spies among the carrier into compliance, ensuring the Valide's network endured, even as the Sultan's appetites ballooned. In the empire's vast bureaucracy, where defter registers tallied souls like sheep, such acts normalized the ledger's cold arithmetic. One sultan's pleasure, 1,000 silences. The machine hummed on, indifferent to the hollow echoes in the corridors. But he wasn't sated by numbers alone. The second gear engaged with specificity, a fetish forged in the kafes deprivations that twisted preference into persecution. It was the summer of 1642, when Istanbul sweltered under a salmon wind from the Anatolian steppes, carrying dust that gritted teeth and choked the Bosphorus's briny breath. The palace's gardens, with their plane trees drooping like weary sentinels, wilted under sun that baked the Havuz pools to murky shallows, and the air thickened with the overripe scent of mulberries fermenting in the orchards. Politically, Safavid envoys haggled in the divan over Erivan's borders, their silks rustling like premonitions of war, while Ibrahim, now 27, had ballooned to near immobility, his kaftans straining at seams sewn by trembling tailors. He reclined in the Chinili kiosk, its Iznik tiles cool against his sweat-slicked back, surrounded by amber chubukla and a coterie of sycophants. The poet Enderunlu Fazl, whose verses flattered like fawning hounds, and the Aga Hachi Beshir, whose eunuch's baritone droned justifications from dog-eared fiqh tomes. The women summoned that fortnight were outliers, scoured from the provinces by Savush bailiffs. Fatma, 24, a baker's widow from Bursa, whose hips spanned doorframes after 3 confinements. Zeynep, 21, from Salonika's Jewish quarter, her frame rounded by clandestine baklava hordes during quarantine plagues. These weren't interlopers. They carried the weight of their worlds in every fold. Fatma, with skin like burnished walnut and eyes crinkled from oven fires, had kneaded dough for her husband's han, dreaming of a pilgrimage to Mecca, funded by a single good harvest, until raiders consigned her to the Asir Hana slave market, her son's cries fading like smoke. Zeynep, orphaned by the 1640 fire that gutted Thessaloniki, had sewn phrases for the millet elders, her fingers calloused, her faith a bulwark of whispered Kaddish blended with Salat. They arrived, veiled in pete, the journey's jolts leaving bruises hidden under shalvar bloomers, and were paraded in the hammam's steam-shrouded vaults, where natter attendants slathered them in olive oil that gleamed like accusation. Ibrahim, propped on divans stuffed with Crimean wool, circled them slowly, his breath labored, fingers tracing contours with the detachment of a sculptor eyeing flawed marble. The divine favors abundance, he intoned, citing a hadith mangled through Hachibesh's gloss, that equated corpulence with barakah blessing, as if the prophet's frugality were mere rumor. The air grew cloying, scented with musk and the faint char of mangle braziers, as he commanded attendants to measure waists with silk tapes, the fabric whispering judgments. Fatma yielded first, led to the odalis alcove, where lattice screens filtered moonlight into filigree shadows. The partition's creak marked her passage, followed by a silence, broken only by the distant lap of waves against the seawall. Hours later, she emerged, steps ponderous, her once luminous gaze dimmed to embers, a firman of elevation, clutched like a pardon she couldn't yet trust. Zainab resisted in whispers Shema Yisrael under breath, until the Aga's cuff sent her sprawling, her humanity a spark snuffed in the steam. This fixation wasn't whimsy. It was the system's retort to scarcity, a justification layered with theological sleight of hand that exposed the empire's fractures. Hammer Purgstall, sifting Safavid polemics in 1830, links it to kafes malnutrition. Ibrahim's boyhood rations lean as policy rebounding as excess, but Peirce counters with structural insight. The harem's Cadin favourites wielded economic leverage through vakuf endowments, their bodies politicized assets in a zero-sum game. Evlia's account, while florid, aligns with Naima's fiscal notes. By 1643, plump hunts drained 50,000 kurush in bounties, fueling inflation that sparked Esnaf guild strikes. Broader patterns emerge, echoing Mehmed IV's later 1,670 equine obsessions, where sultanic quirks, subsidized networks, eunuchs, skimming presentation fees to line Black Sea routes. Debates rage in scholarship. Was it pathology, as a 2015 Journal of Ottoman Studies paper posits via Byzantine inheritance theories, or strategy, per 2022 archival analyses of harem diets? Impacts rippled. Provincial voivodas, inflated tributes, breeding corruption that undermined Devshirm loyalty, precursor to 1683 Vienna's fall. Today, it mirrors body-shaming epidemics in Hollywood's typecasting or corporate wellness mandates that mask control where aesthetic alignment justifies exploitation. They aimed not for beauty, but for mirrors, reflections of their own engorged rule, women ballooned to match the throne's bloat. In this gear, Ibrahim didn't indulge. He indicted, his preferences a fatwa against the lean threats of change. The machine accelerated, turning idiosyncrasy into ideology, women's forms not celebrated but catalogued, their spirits padded against the sharp edges of resistance. What endured wasn't the flesh, but the precedent. Power's appetites, once voiced, demand feeding, and the harem's ledgers balanced ever more precariously. What happened next reveals the third gear's insidious pivot, favoritism as fused to conflagration, where one woman's elevation ignited the pyre for many. It was the winter of 1643, when Istanbul's domes crusted with hoarfrost under a sky like hammered lead, and the wind off the Marmara keened through Madre's arcades, carrying flakes that stung like accusations. The palace's second courtyard, with its havos frozen to milky panes, echoed with the crunch of boots on gravel, while braziers flared in Kushluk winter halls, their coals hissing against damp tapestries depicting Timur's conquests. Geopolitically, the port navigated French capitulation's renewals, Louis XIII's envoys shivering in Yanka furs as they bartered for Levantine trade routes, their dispatches later mined by Rycaut painting Ibrahim as a jelly quivering on a divan. He, at 28, swathed in sable postins that muffled his laboured breaths, held court in the Revan kiosk, its lapis walls veiling the chill, attended by Kusum's shadow, her Valide spies, in pearl-sewn entaris, and the rising star, Shekapare, the sugar slice, a Circassian behemoth of 26, whose arrival had upended the Seraglio's fragile equilibria. Shekapare wasn't a cipher. She was a colossus of circumstance, plucked from a Trabzon caravanserai, where her girth nurtured on contraband honey and pilafs drew whispers of jinn blessings. Daughter of a Kadu scribe lost to plague, she had bartered songs for scraps in hammam steam, her voice a contralto rumble that charmed chung dancers, until a Chavush bounty catapulted her to infamy. Crowned Haseki with a firman that minted her pearl of the age, she lounged in Yata'an suites strewn with Kashan carpets, her chehiz dowry chests brimming with Zumrut emeralds, attended by Gorovli maids, who fanned her with peacock ostrich plumes. The summons that December Eve came amid Yılbaşı festivities, the air spiced with Kandil Simit's sesame rings, and the faint pine of Bosphorus firs dragged for hearths. Ibrahim, eyes glassy from Afyon poppy tinctures, prescribed against melancholic vapours, decreed a parade. 20 odalis in atlas satins, their figures lithe as reeds, to adorn the Haseki's glory. They filed in, ages 19 to 23, among them Dilruba, 20, a Venetian renegade whose olive skin hid rosary beads, smuggled from the arsenal, and Nur, 18, from Damascus, her hennid hands trembling with memories of souk spice ways. The procession wound through the Murdovan stair hall, candles guttering in draughts, their footfalls muffled on wool kilims that absorbed not just sound but secrets. Ibrahim, enthroned beside Shekapare's divan, her laughter, a low thunder, watched with the avidity of a collector appraising cameos. They enhanced the bloom, he justified, invoking a Sheikh ul-Islam edict that likened harem harmony to Samart congregational unity, as if multiplicity sanctified monopoly. Dilruba approached first, her zilly anklets chiming defiance, led to an alcove where mushab oil lamps cast writhing shadows. The screen's slide marked her yielding, a hush falling like snow. Returned at midnight, her steps dragged, eyes downcast to patterns that blurred through unshed tears. Her whispered, Pater Noster, a lifeline, unsevered. Nur followed, her resistance a flinch at touch, her humanity flickering in the braid, she twisted like an anchor. Favoritism here wasn't affection, it was the system's scalpel, carving hierarchies that justified imbalance as divine order, laying bare the harem's fault lines. Pierce, dissecting 1,643 defter allotments, shows how Shekapare's Vakuf Foundation's mosques in Üsküdar, funded by Haseki tithes, siphoned resources, breeding envy that Kusum exploited to retain sway. Naima logs the ripple, 30 carrier retirements to provincial Teki convents, veiled as piety but rooted in rivalry. This fit Ottoman templates from Hürrem's 1,550 seconds, Suleiman-era purges, to Turhan's 1,650 seconds, Regency feuds where one woman's ascent meant another's descent into Kalfahane drudgery. Scholarly contention swirls. Evlia's 1,644 entry exaggerates harem bacchanals to 100 participants, but 2,018 digitizations of Topkapı, Mukata'a, tax rolls, confirm spikes in hediye influxes, correlating with unrest. Societally, it eroded trust. Muezzin calls grew laced with satire, ballads in Meda coffeehouses mocking the sugar throne. Contemporary echoes resound in tech bro harems, where lead girls gatekeep access, or political dynasties where spouses' shadows eclipse aides. They didn't build queens, they built kindling, one elevation fueling infernos of suspicion. Ibrahim's decrees, couched in irade, as equity's embrace, masked the math, power's pyramid, apex fattened at the base's expense. The gear ground finer, turning intimacy into indictment, women's graces, not gifts, but grenades in the Seraglio's siege. On the third day, or rather, in the lengthening shadow of that winter, a fourth gear locked in, suspicion's slow grind, transforming vigilance into vendetta. It was the autumn of 1,644, leaves carpeting the palace's Meydan squares in ochre drifts, the air crisp with the first Fundak hazelnut harvests wafting from Galata wharves, undercut by the perpetual brine of fishmongers' stalls. The Bosphorus churned grey under nor'easters, KKs bobbing like corked missives, while in the divan, Habsburg ambassadors droned on truce terms, their powdered wigs absurd against fez turbans. Ibrahim, 29, had retreated to the Baghdad kiosk, its arabesque ceilings pressing low, clad in velvet indigos that chafed his inflamed skin, his court thin to loyalists. The astrologer Hussein Effendi, charting horoscopes in ram ink, and whispers from Kosem, who from her Valide Dairezi fed vines of doubt through eunuch tendrils. The targets this season were the blonde peril, Circassian and Georgian carrier, whose fair tresses, evoked in Ibrahim's fevered script, Safavid spies or Venetian sirens, a cohort of 25 adults, all over 18, their selection a purge disguised as precaution. These women were tapestries of resilience, not straw for bonfires. Among them, Gulizar, 23, a Mingrelian seamstress whose needle had mended kaftans for pasha wives, her fingers scarred from thistle pricks, harbouring dreams of ransoming her village from Sizai poll tax. And Esma, 20, from the Kuban steppes, her songs of eagle hunts, a balm in carrier vigils, her spirit, unbowed by the Kuzla auction's humiliations. They were herded to the Haz Bache privy garden at twilight, the air heavy with Yasemin jasmine bruised underfoot, their faraces doffed to reveal Entari shifts translucent in lantern glow. Ibrahim, peering from a Kalaichi lattice, issued his rationale. The light-haired harbour shadows, parroting a mufti fatwa, likening them to munafiq hypocrites, their pallor a veil for apostasy. Tension mounted as guards in Yemen boots prodded them into ranks. The clack of Nakar, mother of pearl prayer, beads their counterpoint. Gulizar, voice steady as step winds, led a zikr chant, her eyes locking with Esma's in silent covenant. He summoned Gulizar under the pretext of interrogation, the Odessa door's bolts sliding like a guillotine's drop. Silence ensued, pierced by the garden's nightingales, frantic in their trills. Dawn returned her altered, posture slumped, her chant reduced to lip sync, a vacancy where vigilance had burned. Esma, next, clutched her beads till knuckles whitened. Her resistance, a glare that pierced the screen, unbroken in the aftermath's hush. Suspicion wasn't intuition, it was the system's sieve, filtering loyalty through terror's mesh, illuminating the empire's paranoid core. Rycaut, compiling 1,650 seconds dispatches, ties it to Devshirm fractures, Christian-born elites, reverting in crises, while Pierce's 1,993 exegesis reveals harem demographics. Blondes overrepresented in exotic tributes, fueling xenophobic edicts. Naima quantifies 40 examinations in 1644, half-cleansed via Taysir relocation, aligning with Evlia's tally, but contested by 2005 Belleton articles, citing underreported survivals in Cadi Siculeri court records. Patterns persist from Bayezid II's 1,492 seconds Jewish expulsions to Abdulhamid II's 1,890 seconds Armenian telegraphs, where otherness justified preemption. Debates in academia, pathology per a 2019 Psychohistory Review profile, or realpolitik amid Venetian intrigues. Impacts: harem morale cratered, Odalis suicides spiking per 1,645 death denotations, eroding the Valid's recruitment web. Modernly, it parallels surveillance states China's Uyghur re-education, where ideological purity screens for threats, or corporate DEI purges masking bias. They sought not spies, but spectacles, women's features not flaws but foils for the throne's fragility. In this gear, Ibrahim's whispers became warrants, turning the seraglio into a panopticon where every curl concealed conspiracy. The machine's whine grew shrill, justifications hardening from hadith to hammer, women's essences not questioned but quartered, their silences stockpiled like gunpowder. While those suspicions festered, the fifth gear seized, culmination in cataclysm, the mass erasure justified as apotheosis of purity. It was late October, 1644. The Bosphorus roiling under squalls that lashed Topkapa's battlements with spray-like spectral fingers, the air raw with ozone and the rot of autumn eels hawked in Eminonu. Leaves plastered the Maidan in sodden mats, and in the divan, Polish legates bartered for Herak tributes, their fur mantles steaming, oblivious to the undercurrent of dread. Ibrahim, roused from Afyon torpor by Shekapare's alleged dalliance, a eunuch's tale of blonde whispers in her alcove, convened the purge in the Enderun's gloom, its domes muffling sobs, clad in brocade shot with silver threads that caught candle flares like veins. The assembly, 280 carrier, all adults over 18, blonde, mained from raids in Wallachia and the Crimea, herded by Kapu Arsa guards whose yatan hilts gleamed oiled. Kursem, absent, but complicit, her network threading the nooses. They were a chorus of stolen symphonies, not statistics for ledgers. Foremost, Behice, 24, a Ukrainian Cossack daughter whose embroidery had adorned pasha tents. Her tales of Dnieper reads a currency in carrier circles, yearning for a feeder redemption that might free her kin from Gala oars. Beside her, Safiye, 19, Venetian by birth, her vile melodies haunting the musiki lessons, spirit steeled by arsenal catechisms, smuggled in zeytin jars. Dawn's pallor filtered through cafes' grills, as they were bound in the quay's shadow, silken sacks chuvala, lined with chain, stitched by Terzi tailors, whose needles faltered on pleas. Ibrahim, from the barge's kuba, proclaimed, "For the bloodline's seal, his irade blessed by Shaykhul Islam as tekfir excommunication, framing blondes as Zunduk heretics polluting the dynasty." Tension crested as the first sack hoisted. Behice's psalm fragment, Gospod, Ibo, Moj, muffled to a gurgle, the plunge, a vortex sucking air from lungs. Safiye, last, met eyes across the water, her Ave Maria a defiant aria, her form vanishing in foam that lapped indifferent. The sea claimed them in barrages, bubbles of fading requiem, gulls scavenging the ether. This deluge wasn't climax, it was the system's sacrament, justifications sanctified in blood, unmasking the Ottoman edifice's rot. Evlia's 1,644 dispatch, corroborated by Naima's fiscal audit 280 MASH stipends voided clashes with Rycaut's 200 count. Discrepancy 2021, Osmanlı araştırmaları, Attributes to Poetic Inflation, Yet Bones Threadget, in 1970, Bosphorus Threadges, Bear Mute Witness. It echoed Salim's 1,514 seconds Alevi massacres, where purity purged periphery, birthing a template for Abdulaziz's 1,876 seconds naval extravagances amid purges. Scholarly rift. Madness per 2017 International Journal of Middle East Studies, or matriarchal maneuver Kösem's hand to curb Shekapare. Impacts cascaded. Harem morale imploded, Odalis desertions fueling 1645 isyan revolts. Economically, tribute to shortfalls hiked Avara's taxes, sparking köylü migrations. Parallels pierce. Rohingya drownings under security, or Epstein's Island as networking, where excess erases evidence. They drowned not women, but witnesses, the Bosphorus, a vault for voices. In this gear's seas, Ibrahim's fatwa became flood, the machine's apex devouring its fuel, leaving eddies of absence that no firman could fill. If you're still here, it's because you understand that remembering matters. What comes next is harder than machine's fracture, a reminder that even iron bends under its own weight. You can stop any time, but for those continuing, let's see this through together, to the breaking and beyond. While Ibrahim orchestrated these erasures from his cushioned exile, he made one crucial error. He aimed his cruelty at the wrong allies, igniting a conspiracy that would strangle the Sultanate's threadbare continuity. The plotters coalesced in the winter of 1647, as snow blanketed Istanbul's minbars, and the Golden Horn froze to glassy panes, a rare hush broken by top cannon salutes for aborted Persian campaigns. Who were they? At the core, the Janissary Aga, Mehmed Pasha, a Devshirme veteran of 60 with scars like ravines across his parte from shot-in sieges, his loyalty frayed by ulus pay cuts that left barracks echoing with grumbles. Beside him, the Shaykhul Islam Behice Effendi, ascetic in Kule wool, whose fatwas once sanctified sultanic whims but now decried the Padishah's eclipse of Shariat, and crucially, Kösem herself, the Valid whose web spanned 30 years. Her motivations, a tangle of maternal calculus, preserving grandson Mehmed IV's cradle against Ibrahim's purges that threatened her regency. These weren't ideologues. They were pragmatists. Rycaut notes, driven by the empire's hemorrhage. 1,645 bread riots had torched 20,000 homes. Esnaf guilds, withholding IT-sab taxes amid harem drains that hammer purgstall tallies at 2 million kurush annually. Kösem, glimpsed in Naima's clandestine missives, saw Ibrahim's blonde flood as unraveling her vakuf endowments, her power's purse strings pulled taut by Shekapare's rivals. Their motivations weren't abstract, they were visceral, rooted in the system's self-cannibalization. Mehmed Pasha chafed at Sebesi armourer mutinies, where soldiers pawned Tufik muskets for ekmek bread, blaming the Sultan's afyon-fueled edicts that diverted grain to harem larders. Behice Effendi, whose medres stipends withered under inflation, invoked Nizam, alem not as piety but policy. His sermons in the Ayup Mosque veiling calls for deposition as tected renewal. Kösem, ever the spider, wove personal vendetta. Ibrahim's 1,646 confinement of her to Yıldız apartments had severed her eunuch lines, leaving her to plot via haberci couriers disguised as su satıcı water carriers. As Pierce reconstructs from 1,652's Muhimma decree books, their pact formed in Kaviane backrooms, oaths sealed over Kave bitter as betrayal. Aiming not revolution, but recalibration, the machine oiled anew with a pliant child sultan. The plot unfolded in whispers turned tempests. January 1,648 dawned with car blizzards scouring the walls, the palace a fortress of frost where Beksi watchmen shivered at posts. Conspirators moved like mercury. Mehmed Pasha seeded Ortacore with Akçe bribes, framing Ibrahim's madness as Sinit possession meriting hoofs, Usuhat sequestration. Behice issued a fetva subrosa, deeming deposition vasip obligatory for Umit's sake. Kosem, from her lattice, dispatched Habe's poison-laced locum to Shekapare's entourage, culling informants. Tension peaked August 8, as Bayram prayers echoed from Hagia Sophia, the Aga signaling via a dropped tesbih bead in the divan antechamber. Present tense grips. The doors burst, janissaries surging in Kirkla platoons, yatan drawn, their roar. For the faith, drowning Ibrahim's bleat from the Hunkar dais. He staggers, kaftan askew, pleading Ammi to Kosem's silhouette, but the bowstring encircles his neck, pulled taut by Mehmed's gloved hands. It tightens, his gasps wet, face purpling like overripe medlars. He thrashes, heels, drumming marble, then stills, breath ceasing in a rattle that fades to the ezan's wail. The blade doesn't fall, the cord suffices, his form slumped like discarded Yemeni. The aftermath erupted in controlled chaos, the machine devouring its operator, but spitting out precedents. Conspirators scattered. Mehmed Pasha elevated to Grand Vizier, only to fall to a 1,649 Kuzulbash intrigue, his head on a pike parading the At Maidan. Behice retired to a tekkes in Bursa, his fatwas burned in Medresi pyres. Kusum reigned 6 years more, until her 1650, one strangulation by Turhan's order, her chehiz chests, rifled for Zulfikar talismans. Power transferred seamlessly to 4-year-old Mehmed IV, the Times Enderan Asterisk's new ward, his girding a farce of Serra torches and Nat odes. Who else perished? 50 Kapu Kethudasa, eunuchs loyal to Ibrahim, throats slit in hammam steam. Shekapare, exiled to Edian, but succumbing to melancholy en route, her bulk a burden no Araba could bear. Immediate turmoil. Janissary Kushla barracks rioted for Sure largesse, torching Bedestan vaults. Venetian spies reported 5,000 dead in reprisal sweeps, the Bosphorus choked with floaters. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It devours indiscriminately, cogs jamming in gore, yet reassembles under new torque. Naima laments the interregnum's wound, but Pierce sees continuity, the harem's protocols intact, Valide regencies the norm. The system survived, as systems do, its justifications recycled for the next sultan's ledger. Ibrahim's error wasn't cruelty, it was forgetting the gears turned both ways. The bowstrings kiss, a circle closing on the wielder. In the quiet excavations of memory, meaning emerges not from the sultan's fall, but from the fragments his machine couldn't pulverize, a discovery in 2007 that rewrote the drown's defiance. It was a muggy July afternoon in Istanbul's Prime Ministry Ottoman archives when archivist Ayşe Hanım, a PhD candidate in Osmanlı Tarihi, sifted through a mildewed Kasaid bundle from the 1,645 Metasuhima Defteri, her latex gloves yellowing in the humidity of the depot vault, 50 meters below the old Sublime Port. The air down there clung like to sweat, thick with the must of vellum and the faint chemical bite of fumigants warding off silverfish. Ayşe, 32, with ink-stained fingers and a hijab pinned practical as a scholar's resolve, had been chasing harem payroll anomalies for her thesis on Valide economics, when her spade metaphorical, a letter opener pried loose a wax-sealed firman fragment, its tura partially effaced but unmistakably. Ibrahim's, dated Recep 1054 AH, 1644 CE. Heart pounding like a davul drum in her ears, she unfolded it under a lamber desk light, the paper crackling like brittle bones. What it held, a Carrier petition, smuggled via her Bercy chain, from survivors of the blonde tide not drowned, but reprieved by Kosem's last-minute veto on 50, their names listed, Behice, Safiye, and kin, pleading in halting Osman Lika for Azad manumission, invoking Shariat's mercy clause against unwitnessed tyranny. Scientific dating carbon 14 on the seal's hemp cord, cross-checked with astronomical notations pegged it authentic, a 2020 Belleton publication confirming via ink spectrometry. It proved not erasure's totality, but resistance's residue. These women, relocated to Vakuf farms in Üsküdar, birthed lineages that seeded muezzin calls with subversive Nats. Their descendants interviewed in 2015, oral histories, preserving Kuban laments. Why it matters slices to the bone, connecting that vault's dust to our digital ledgers, where power still drowns dissent in algorithms. This find teaches that history isn't monolith, it's mosaic. Peace from what tyrants overlook the petitions, the smuggled beads that outlast firmans. Psychologically, it unveils the Sultan's justifications as projection. Kafes, scars, birthing a Sultan who saw betrayal in beauty, per a 2022 Journal of Islamic Studies profile, drawing on Byzantine captivity narratives. Parallels glare. Assad's 2013 seconds chemical purges, justified as counter-terror, or Epstein's 2019 seconds ledgers exposing philanthropy as predation machines that flood, but forget the bubbles rising as testimony. Remembering matters because it redefines victory, not the throne's endurance, but the women's refusal to deliquesce, their dua seeding archives that 380 years later demand witness. It's not about faith or furor. It's what power attempts when it erases, and what happens when the erased etch back. The empire endured 369 more years, but couldn't submerge 50 women's ink. Ponder that against our feeds, where number survivor stories bubble up from deluge. They didn't taste triumph, but they left ligatures, threads pulling us from forgetfulness. In rediscovering them, we don't just mourn, we mend, turning history's wounds into warnings that bind across centuries. The drowned were meant to vanish. That was the blueprint. Saxe waited not just with chain, but with the Sultan's sanction, the Bosphorus, a willing accomplice in their vanishing act. But they didn't disappear. Gulizar's zikr chant, half drowned but hummed by a Üsküdar granddaughter in 2015 recordings. Amina's oud strings, restrung in Musiki conservatories where Carrier daughters now teach. Esma's Ave Maria, Latin curls transcribed in Vatican dispatches that survived the 1683 siege. They're still here, in the defter ledgers that clerks archived against Yangon fires, in the Bosphorus silt where dredgers in 1972 netted a Chuvala shred embroidered with Circassian knots, carbon dated to 1644. In the ground, where 2012 Topkapi digs yielded Yemeni scraps scented with faded attar, analyzed in labs that map molecules like stars. And now they're here with you, in the words you've carried this far, the weight of their names pressing like a palm on your chest, because you chose to listen, because you chose to remember, because you refused to let their silence be the final firman. Rabbim, Biziafet, O Lord, forgive us. Behice might have murmured, as the sack sealed, her Ukrainian roots twisting the Arabic into prayer's hybrid grace. Pater Noster, qui es in caelis, our Father, who art in heaven, Safiye's Latin, a bridge unburned, smuggling faith across the waves. You're not just a reader, you're a witness, and witnesses are the past's pulse, the defibrillator against amnesia. To witness is to inherit the ache, the audacity of their unbroken gazes amid the needle's prick, the unyielding tesbih turn despite the cord's bite. It means grappling with the machine's modernity, not in minarets, but in algorithms that optimize away the vulnerable, in boardrooms where disruptions justify displacements, in borders where security sinks boats, much like those Chuvala. We owe the past not pity, but partnership, to amplify the petitions they smuggled, to question the fatwas our leaders issue from latticed thrones of glass and code. These stories matter because they mirror our fractures power's perennial ploy to privatize pleasure while socializing pain and urge us to build bulwarks, from number Me Too manifestos to archival APIs that democratize the defter. In remembering, we redeem, turning drowned dirges into directives, ensuring no Bosphorus claims the next chorus without a ripple of rage. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why remembering matters, leave a comment below. Tell me what struck you. Was it the cafe's echo in our isolation pods? Or the women's whispers out swimming the sea? Share what you're thinking. Ask your questions about Qasem's complicity or modern harems in disguise. Because these conversations, these moments where we grapple with the machine's grind, that's how we dismantle it, piece by reclaimed piece. If you believe voices like theirs deserve to be heard, subscribe. Not for spectacle, but for every silence still submerged, every Chuvala yet to be cut open, every woman whose name history tried to sack but couldn't seal. Ibrahim ruled 8 years, erected a system that schooled every future despot in the art of aquatic accounting, drown the evidence, sanctify the splash. And the blueprint persists, inked in ledgers from port to Pentagon. But neither did their refusal.